As of right now, Pokemon cards are not just a trend, they're a worldwide phenomenon. Though with all this insane hype, one question that often gets left behind is, what will be the prices of current Pokemon cards within the next 5 years? So that's why in this video, I want to go over the future forecast of Pokemon cards and explore this topic in great detail. Now, a lot of people are saying Pokemon cards are a trend, though here's a reason why that is flawed. Pokemon cards are not a trend because of how widespread the hobby is. I mean, it's not even limited to one age group. You have kids ripping packs on their birthday parties, all the way to millennial millionaires spending 5 figures on old booster boxes. I mean, even me as a marketing professional, I wouldn't even be able to tell you who the target audience is for Pokemon cards because it is so widespread. You are literally in the middle of a whirlwind where you don't even know who the target market is. Though one area that's super important about all this is the fact of how many younger generations are currently collecting Pokemon, and I personally think this is very important because once these core memories are established, they do tend to get revisited one day later in life. But the real question is, are these current modern Pokemon cards good enough to keep up like base set did in the 90s, or will they eventually fade away? Now also, I just want to say, if you are new to the channel, welcome aboard. My name's Phil and I run this Pokemon collecting and investing YouTube channel. Definitely feel free to subscribe to stay in the loop for consistent Pokemon TCG content. Though I think there is a lot of areas to unpack when speaking about the future of Pokemon cards and when we kind of do a 5-year forecast of what's going to happen. Now, something that a lot of people are not talking about, but I do think it's going to become a big thing within the future, is that grading companies will battle for dominance. Right now, card grading is somewhat competitive, I suppose. You do have the big three. You have Tag, who entered, but of course PSA holds the most market value. And even though you may personally not, in terms of the collector market, most people have the most trust for PSA. Though I do think that grading companies are gonna really need to start leveling up, especially in terms of AI and what's capable. We already see what is possible with AI and how AI grading is becoming the future. Now, PSA has a lot of money and a lot of people have expensive slabs with PSA. So believe it or not, a lot of people hope that PSA stays at the top because they want to protect their slabs. They want to protect their investments. They want to protect all the cards they own in high grades. But here's the thing, in the next 5 years, we are going to have to see more AI tools come in and more grading that is more transparent where we get reports. I think Tag is doing a good thing. The only thing is Tag doesn't have the legacy or the status like PSA. But if PSA kind of has a look on the market, they can probably see, hey, people really like what Tag is doing. The only thing is Tag needs to level up a little bit more to get on our levels. So I do think we will see more dominance from PSA as the years go on. And I think there will be more competitors to enter the market. Having competitors is a good thing. Do you remember the console debates when everyone used to say, oh, I'm a PlayStation guy, I'm an Xbox guy, I'm a Nintendo guy. And now everyone's kind of like saying, wait, don't complain, don't pick a side. It's just good to have competition because then companies won't charge crazy amounts of money on a console. Well, that's kind of like grading as well. It is always good to have a lot of competitors in the market because it makes prices stay low for the consumer and more competitive for all of us. But in saying that, grading companies will need to introduce more technology to ensure that things get detected better and to give more transparency for their customers. Now, something that I think that we can expect for Pokemon cards and their prices is the fact that a lot of the chase cards today will go through a big bounce back in a few years' time. We're gonna experience a nostalgia cycle. The problem that's happening right now is that a new card gets released and it has this huge amount of hype and momentum and everyone wants to buy the card right away because they're kind of like saying, hey, if I can get it now, in a few years it's gonna go up in value. But what we can do is we can look at historical information and kind of make forecasts, okay? In marketing, there's a good saying that you can't predict the future, but what you can do is look at historical data and just assume the same intent for the future. Now, it's not guaranteed, but it is a pretty good way of getting some sort of clarity of what's going to happen. If we look at the top chase cards of this era or the last 5 years alone, it is very likely that in 5 years' time, they will still be desired by a group of collectors who are nostalgic for this. If we look at anything from Chill and Rain days or even Evolving Skies, we can still see that there is a large group of people who still love collecting those cards. Same thing goes with a lot of the chase cards today. So we can expect, if we're looking at historical information, that will remain the same. But I do think a lot lot of these top chase cards will be able to hold their price points, especially because there's so many fans, so many younger generations collecting Pokemon cards at the moment, that when they see these cards in the future, they're all going to say, wow, these cards literally shaped an era. Though in saying that, for some exciting news, I've actually teamed up with Collector and we are both giving away this PSA 10 RCS V-Star from Crown Zenith. Enter now on my channel's Discord. Now today's video is sponsored by the Collector app. So the Collector app is a next generation portfolio manager that tracks your collection's worth over time. Now if you've downloaded the latest version, Collector also has a set analytics tab, which allows you to get real deep insights into a set's data and history based on historical performance. For example, when you're on here, you can see a card set's volatility score along with the market movers inside a set, and you even get a very comprehensive breakdown of all the rarities. Collector is definitely one of the best ways to track and manage your collectibles. Now also, if you do have Collector Pro, you can just scan a card with your phone's camera and it will appear in the app. A big shout out to Collector for collaborating on the RCS V-Star giveaway, which is on my channel's Discord. You can learn more about Collector within the video's description. Now let's get back into it. Now when talking about the future of Pokemon cards, one thing that we kind of do need to understand is that vintage will continue to grow in popularity and there is a chance it will lead the market. Now, whenever I talk about vintage, it kind of gets met with a bit of resistance from people. Some people just say, the vintage cards, they're so boring, Phil. I like my modern cards. I like my full arts. I like alternate arts. I like illustration rares, SIRs, the whole lot, right? But here's the thing with vintage and why it is in a very strong position to lead the market and why it will grow. You have to remember with vintage that these were the cards that started it all. And don't forget, the amount of vintage cards that come in high quality on the market is very limited. So you do always get more higher end collectors or people who like having more money within the hobby try to go to these vintage cards because they are part of history. Now, as modern Pokemon grows, as you get the overprinting supply issues, as you get all these new sets coming out, you're always going to get people that look back. Don't forget, even the cards of today, one day will be considered vintage. Whether or not they're going to be called vintage cards, probably not, but they will be old school cards from this era. But you have to remember that vintage cards do have an interesting way of rebounding. In 2020 and 2021, that was when Pokemon cards became super popular again. Now, since then, it's kind of calmed down. But even right now, we can see vintage card prices have bounced back. And I think it's always going to be a continuous thing. Vintage will go a little bit out of fashion, but it always will maintain and will always be a strong point in the market. You just have too many people who go back to it. Now, personally, I really prefer modern. If you look at my channel, most of the content I cover is about modern Pokemon cards, though vintage does have a place for collectibles. Now, one thing where vintage kind of struggles is that you have a lot of naivety when it comes to vintage, because you have a lot of these old heads who just, I remember that card from when I opened that fossil pack all those years ago, and they over leverage and they spend ridiculous amounts of money on their vintage cards. That kind of behavior is very prevalent because you just have people who are chasing the nostalgia wins. They can't get enough of it. They see an old Pokemon card that they had and they have to just spend crazy amounts of money to prove that they own that once back in the, I don't know why it happens, but people just have this thing where they like to really overspend on vintage cards. I think as the years go on, that will kind of just fix itself. The one cool thing about vintage, if you can get vintage cards in good quality, especially if they're PSA 8s, 9s, or 10s, they definitely have room to continue to grow as they are very iconic pieces in Pokemon's history. Now, something to also understand is that nostalgia cycles will drive targeted surges for particular Pokemon and Pokemon sets. If there's one thing I've learned about Pokemon and all the years I've collected and played the games, is that Pokemon constantly recycles. Something that's once not liked becomes really popular and loved, and then it leaves, and then it becomes popular again, and so on and so forth. If we just look at this for the TCG, we can see Destined Rivals was the resurgence of Team Rocket cards. Before Destined Rivals, it was 20 years since we saw Team Rocket cards in the TCG. Same thing with Pokemon 151, it kind of recycled itself with base set. But even outside of the TCG, we've got the Pokemon Legends ZA game. What's getting introduced? Mega Evolutions are coming back. Mega Evolutions are being recycled from 2013. If we look at the Pokemon video games, you had Pokemon Red and Blue, and then you had Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. You had Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Then in 2009, you had Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, so on and so forth. Pokemon continues to recycle their franchise, and what they do is they get their audience who's kind of grown up with the franchise and they bring them back in by, drawing from nostalgia, drawing from old school sets. So that's why you can expect cards like Gigantamax cards to be valuable one day in the future, kind of like how Mega Evolution cards are now also booming because of the whole Pokemon Legends EA. This always happens, and targeted nostalgia will always be a thing with Pokemon because that's just how it always operates. There's always a big recycle, and there's always big kind of events in Pokemon as well. When you look at Pokemon Go, that was a massive event. You had Pokemon TCG Pocket as well in 2024. You've always got these big events that happen in Pokemon, and it's really good to know for the TCG, it also is going to come in waves. Now, another thing that I don't think a lot of people are speaking about at the moment, but I think AI will become far more important in this hobby, especially for detecting fake Pokemon cards, and also, like I mentioned, for grading as well. I actually think one of my favorite things about collecting Pokemon, and the reason why people go, hey Phil, why do you like collecting Pokemon so much? Like, what is it about Pokemon cards that makes you so drawn into them? But I kind of like Pokemon cards because they actually bring it back to the basics rather than worrying about the next kind of crazy digital thing that's happening, or you're just collecting Pokemon cards, which are literally cardboard, but they do bring some fulfillment. Though in saying that, I do think AI will start entering the hobby a little bit more with detecting fake Pokemon cards and also potentially creating fake Pokemon cards as well. There's always a chance for that as well. Though at this stage, there doesn't seem anything like that's possible. But hey, with how AI is developing, I wouldn't count that out either. Now, another area that I think for the future that won't matter as much as people worry about it today is pop reports. I think pop reports are a big discussion. When we look at vintage, a lot of people kind of argue, and I do as well, that hey, vintage is so desired because the pop reports are so low. But I do think pop reports will start becoming a little bit less of a thing that everyone's so highly focused on. The reason why is because when you look at something and it has like a pop report of 15,000, but when you really think of how many collectors there are in the world, 15,000 doesn't seem all that much. With how many new fans are entering the hobby and a lot of people want to collect so many Pokemon cards, it really doesn't become that much at all. I think the fixation of pop reports will slowly calm down because I think as well, a lot of collectors have gotten smarter. As soon as they open their cards, penny sleeve, top loader, and most people, if they pull an expensive chase card, it gets sent straight away to get graded as well. So for that reason, I think it's just expected that cards come in good quality. Now also, if you have been a long-time viewer of the channel, I also have a second YouTube channel where I cover Pokemon and Nintendo gaming history called Philip's Trick Room. In a previous video, I actually sent a Pokemon from the GameCube all the way to the Nintendo Switch 2. You can find the details of Philip's Trick Room within the video's description. Though in saying that, Pokemon cards are always going to be going through a big ebb and flow in terms of popularity. I think one thing right now that I'm seeing a lot of people kind of worry about, like especially if people have, overspent on Pokemon cards, they're like saying, oh, what if they go down in price? I think Pokemon, if you just look at the history of it, it is very unlikely for Pokemon to have any wild crash in terms of, Pokemon cards or anything really, because it's got such a strong market and dedicated audience, and it always seems to just outperform everything it does. Pokemon is literally an outlier, and I think a lot of companies just envy Pokemon for how successful it is. Though there is gonna be some changes that happen with the hobby, and I think as more time goes on, I think as more people kind of think about the hobby and what they want out of Pokemon cards, there will be some shifts. But I think the line is really blurred of who is the collector of Pokemon cards, because you do have your whales, but not everyone is a whale. You've got your TCG players, but then again, Pokemon's quite unique in that sense because there's such a big audience that just collects and doesn't even play the TCG. For Yu-Gi-Oh, that's completely reversed. And something that's really interesting about Pokemon collecting and Pokemon investing, it's always the same thing people say. Everyone is kind of hoarding sealed products right now. Everyone's collecting Pokemon cards right now, so they will not be valuable in the future because everyone has the same idea. Problem why that logic is flawed is because the hobby continues to grow. More people enter. So, all those people that were collecting Chilling Reign back in the day, or Evolving Skies, or Fusion Strike, now those numbers don't even seem that much because you've got so many new people who've entered the hobby. And if the hobby continues to grow like it's going, all the collections we have today won't even seem like that much in 5 or 10 years' time. Though when discussing Pokemon cards and the future, there's something important that comes to mind, and that is the fact that collecting Pokemon is a very expensive hobby. Though I believe every collector needs to learn how to collect Pokemon cards on a budget, and if you're wondering how to do that, I actually do reveal that in this video here. Within this video that's appearing on screen, I go over in detail how to collect Pokemon cards on a budget. I recommend clicking the video that's appearing on screen right now, and I'll see you there.